Hello, my name is Art Delinsky, and you are listening to the Art Deli Sideshow. I'm so glad you're here. On this show, I've been following the international court's reaction to the war in Gaza, and as you can see from videos I have up from last September where I covered the UN's resolutions, mostly aimed at achieving humanitarian aid and relief to Gazans as well as a ceasefire. Now, part of these UN resolutions made way for what we know today as the Board of Peace. The Board of Peace, a U.S.-led international transitional body tasked with disarmament of Hamas, reconstruction of Gaza, as well as the security mechanisms in the Strip. It's chaired by Trump, and not in his capacity as president, but him as a person, so that's fucking frightening, and is made up of three main bodies. The Board of Peace Executive Board, which includes folks like Marco Rubio, Tony Blair, and also the president of the World Bank. Please keep that in mind. The Gaza Executive Board under that, which includes the same kind of, high-end people, and also Jared Kushner, because why the fuck not? And also a prominent Israeli real estate and businessman, Yakir Gabay. And I don't know if he's responsible for the images that we got of what Gaza would look like, quote unquote, New Gaza, but it looks fucking crazy. Under that is the only committee that actually has Palestinians and will eventually be 15 Palestinian technocrats supervised by the Board of Peace. So far, 12 have been confirmed, and the NCAG, the National Committee for the Administration of Gaza, aka the Technocrats, will be appointed and vetted by the U.S., Israel, and Egypt. In January 2026, Ali Shahath, who held a senior role in the PA, was set to be appointed as the chief commissioner of the committee, but Israel has been blocking committee members from entering the territory, so that is a problem. Which brings me to today's episode. Last week, July 7th, Hamas declared that it will renounce its leadership of the Gaza Strip and will dissolve its governing operations in Gaza and hand it over to the U.S.-backed Board of Peace Technocratic Committee. While this isn't like a full-pledged total disarmament and demilitarization of Hamas, I think it's pretty big news and worth unpacking. So this is what we're going to do today. I have this interview from Democracy Now! With Mr. Iraqi, who is a senior Israel-Palestine analyst at the International Crisis Group. It's about 4 minutes. I'm going to chop it up to three main sections and kind of intervene in between. So take it away, Amy Goodman.
Mohammed al-Farah, the head of the Hamas administration, has resigned. What does this mean? What does all of this mean in this so-called technocratic group taking over of Palestinians from, is it the Palestinian Authority?
Thanks for having me, Amy. So in practice, what this announcement does at the moment does very little. In practice, Hamas is still the de facto governing authority on the Palestinian-populated side of Gaza. The NCAG, the Palestinian Technocratic Committee, that's supposed to take over those governing duties, is still basically stuck in Cairo and not allowed to enter into Gaza to assume those duties. And even if the NCAG did enter Gaza, the conditions are not ripe for any of these governing institutions to properly function. Israel is still maintaining a very serious blockade. It is not allowing sufficient aid to come in. As we heard from the previous segment, everything from hospitals to clinics to basic goods and services are still very short, and people are still suffering. With that said, what this announcement does actually sends a very important political signal from Hamas to, first of all, the United States as the head of the Board of Peace and as the main sort of broker of the ceasefire deal, to signal Hamas's commitment to the ceasefire deal and trying to move it forward as much as possible. And tied with that is that the Hamas is trying to counter an Israeli claim that Hamas is not interested in seeing the truce uphold, that it is not interested in giving up power, even though Hamas officials have said for months now that they are ready to hand over all those duties. So far, we've seen a tepid response from the Board of Peace and from the United States, but we'll probably see in the coming days whether this, at least gesture, to begin that process will actually unfold.
So what he's saying essentially, I think it's so fascinating, is that, okay, Hamas did this first step of saying, okay, Technocratic Committee, you take over the Gaza Strip, because that they were appointed to do that by the Board of Peace. Now you have this Technocratic Committee that can't even enter the Gaza Strip, so they can't function or operate to do the work that they were appointed to do. And he's saying even if they were, the conditions are not ripe, and that there's limited basic resources and that people are suffering. And my question is how? Sure, there's a whole military blockade of it all, which also doesn't make sense because Israel is part of the Board of Peace, so should be on board with opening up humanitarian aid to the fullest extent, even though there's issues there, and I understand, and we'll go over it in just a moment, so hush up. But another thing that stood out to me is that to be a member nation, you must pledge $1 billion. Do you remember that? And right now the Board of Peace has $17 billion in pledges from members. And I'm not the director of no national, international humanitarian organization, but I think in my heart that maybe $17 billion is enough to start at least one kind of on-the-ground project, but also considering that the president of the World Bank sits on the executive committee of the Board of Peace, and the World Bank is the world's largest bank, and also its mission is to, and I quote, achieve the twin goals of ending extreme poverty and building shared prosperity. So how are they unable to do that? Well, I found an article, a very interesting article from the Financial Times. I'll link it. It's up on the screen. Donald Trump's Board of Peace fund is empty. Despite $17 billion in pledges, organization is stuck in limbo with no money flowing to projects in Gaza. I'm going to read just a little tiny portion of it. The official fund for Donald Trump's Board of Peace is empty, and the organization is stuck in a legal and political limbo that has held up projects to rebuild Gaza. The U.S. president described the board, which solicited $1 billion for a lifetime membership fee from world leaders, as one of the most consequential international organizations created. Member states pledged $7 billion for the board's Gaza relief package, quote unquote, and Trump promised a further $10 billion in U.S. funding. But for 4 months after its establishment, the board's financial fund set up by the World Bank has received no money from donors, according to 4 people familiar with the matter. $0 have been deposited, one said. Rather than using the fund administered by the World Bank and endorsed by the UN, the board has received donations directly via its JP Morgan account, the board's spokesperson and other person familiar with the arrangements said. While the World Bank must report on the financial position of the Gaza Fund to contributors and board members, no independent transparency requirements are in place for the JP Morgan account. I'm not even going to read anymore, even though if you want to, you can. I'll leave the information in the description. So, in the words of the Big Lebowski.
Where's the money, Lebowski?
Where's the money, dude? Where's the money? This is pretty insane. So after I read this, I was like, well, why don't they give the money to the UN or other people who are there who have done this type of work? Because it seems like they're having a tough time. And just to make sure, I searched whether the UN is in Gaza. I knew that it is. It's been in the region for years and years and years, but I just wanted to make sure because I know that there have been some offices closed and stuff, and they are. And I found this article from Al Jazeera titled Hamas denies UN accusations over Gaza aid distribution interference, which is very, they're using very mild language. It's basically an article about a UN humanitarian truck being attacked by Hamas militants. And again, reminding us that the situation on the ground is a lot more complicated. It's not black and white. Very quickly, I'll read over this. A United Nations official has accused Hamas of hampering humanitarian operations in Gaza and putting aid workers at risk, an allegation the Palestinian group rejects. Humanitarian workers were forced to halt food distributions after armed personnel affiliated with the de facto authorities forcibly entered the Abu Rashid food distribution point in Jalabiyah, North Gaza. UN Deputy Special Coordinator for the Middle East Peace Process, Ravid Al-Kaborov, said in a statement on Monday. He said that the armed personnel entered a World Food Program warehouse and assaulted 2 truck drivers who were also delivering humanitarian supplies. He said these incidents are not isolated and reflected an increasingly dangerous pattern of intimidation, violence, and obstruction, including smuggling attempts, targeting and abusing humanitarian operations. Hamas, which controls parts of Gaza, strongly denied the allegations. We categorically reject the language of incitement and distortion of facts and the manufactured narrative presented in the statements. The group said that the distribution center was not attacked or raided, but it was instead a site for a, quote, official law enforcement operation carried out after the discovery of smuggled items, quote, concealed inside humanitarian aid parcels. Insane. So again, situation isn't black and white, but this actually brings us to the next point about disarmament, which was the 13th point in the 20-point peace plan. So let's go back to that interview real quick.
And Amjad, no matter who administers Gaza, the key issue is who holds armed power in Gaza. Is there any indication that Hamas would disarm? Something the ceasefire called for?
So for months, we've known that the regional mediators have actually come towards a sort of general framework that's trying to divide the question of weapons into what they call heavy weapons versus light weapons. So we're talking about heavy weapons in terms of rockets, RPGs, and the smaller weapons being firearms that are quite pervasive across the Strip. And the mediators saw this as a framework that can actually move the decommissioning or disarmament question forward. The problem is that Israel has actually maintained a very maximalist position where even Prime Minister Netanyahu has said that as far as he's concerned, disarmament even goes as far as those firearms, as the AK-47. And so you're having a major clash with this. And the Board of Peace, including Nikolai Mladenov, who is the quote-unquote high representative for Gaza under the Board of Peace, is supposed to be trying to sort of negotiate or mediate a process within those talks. But what we've actually heard is that Mladenov is mostly presenting a much more Israeli position about what that disarmament should look like, which Hamas and other Palestinian factions have pushed back on. So the issue is not necessarily that there's an absence of a framework, but there are still huge political divergences, and that the Board of Peace is still rather skewed in how it sees that disarmament question moving forward.
So as we can hear, and as we know, the disarmament of Hamas is really the meat and potatoes of this quote-unquote ceasefire, which again has been violated numerous times with over 1,000 Palestinian civilians dead under Israeli bombs. And we just heard in this clip that the framework for the disarmament has had political divergences around how the process should proceed. And on the show, I've said that I don't ever see Hamas laying down their weapons, and that's why last week's announcement really surprised me. It doesn't mean they never said anything about laying down their arms, but they did say that they're going to dissolve operations in the Gaza Strip, making way for the non-democratically appointed Technocratic committee to rule on the day-to-day operations. And I think, to me, personally, it shows something very clear. I don't think necessarily it's like good faith or goodwill, or maybe there's like a tiny bit of it. It shows that Hamas officials are realizing that they have no more cachet for political negotiations, and pretty much they're going to continue with or without them. They're in this kind of fucked up FUBAR situation where if they keep resisting, they're going to keep hurting the same people that they claim to defend. And at the same time, the humanitarian issues that are happening there are so dire and have gone on for so long. And since these Hamas officials have no political weight to be able to provide assistance or find assistance, and when there is humanitarian aid, it's either being blocked or it's being raided by armed militants, and all of this is political. This is all a political quagmire FUBAR situation, and they're losing their political cachet, and it's making a perfect opportunity for a possible disarmament. I don't see any signs of that happening today or tomorrow, but I do think that shit is bad enough that there will be no other choice. Now, a time in history where something kind of similar happened was when the IRA was disarmed. That's the Irish Republican Army. For those who are not familiar, they were a paramilitary group that carried out politically motivated attacks for decades to oppose and resist British occupation in Ireland. Now, I'm not going to go too much into details, but my point is that in the late 90s, no one thought that the IRA would lay down its arms. That wasn't conceivable at the time. It was also in the 90s when the word terrorist was said. Folks didn't think people from the Middle East or folks like Hamas. They were thinking Irish folks from the IRA. So these perceptions can change very quickly. Now, I want to share a very short clip from the day that the IRA announced its willingness to begin disarming and what that process actually looked like. Now, if you look up on the screen, I'm going to also do comparisons for the IRA and for Gaza. So try to take a look. If you have any questions, pop it down the screen, but please look at the screen for this part of the video. Thank you.
After years of violence in the north, the first major breakthrough in the peace process came in 1994, when the IRA declared an unconditional ceasefire. The next major breakthrough was the signing of the Good Friday Agreement. This in turn led to the appointment of the International Decommissioning Body, headed by General John de Chastelain. In another significant move, the IRA, for the first time in its history, allowed two international observers, Cyril Ramaphosa and Marty Ahtisaari, to inspect some of its arms dumps. In August of this year, the IRA agreed with the IICD, a scheme for putting its arms completely and verifiably beyond use. Today, in what's being heralded as an historic and groundbreaking move, the Provisional IRA honoured its commitment to the decommissioning body. In its statement, the paramilitary organisation said it had made the move because the political process was on the point of collapse, and that such a collapse would have put the overall peace process in jeopardy. Their statement went on, therefore, in order to save the peace process, we have implemented the scheme agreed with the IICD in August. On the 6-1 News this evening, Gerry Adams gave his response to the IRA move.
This is a huge moment in the history of our island, in the relationships between our island and the island of Britain, in the history of physical force republicanism. Let's not fritter it away or reduce it. Let's take it as a huge leap forward, as an opportunity to liberate all of those who want to be part of the collective job of building a better future.
Along with Gerry Adams, the former SDLP leader John Hume was one of the main architects of the current peace process.
And I think it's very welcome. And I think the language of the statement is very positive. When in particular they say that the peace process is under threat from a political collapse, and that it was the duty of everyone to do everything they could to resolve that, and that's what they were doing. And I think that's very positive.
Tonight's statement from the IRA is being heralded by some as groundbreaking, momentous and historic. But for many in the Republican movement, such a statement would have been unimaginable just a couple of months ago. The IRA, for the first time in its history, has destroyed some of its own weapons, in their own words, putting them completely and verifiably beyond use, and allowing international observers to witness the event.
What an interesting history lesson. So far, we can see a lot of similarities in the process between Ireland, Britain, and the IRA, and also Israel, Hamas, and Gaza. And the Board of Peace has not announced what the process of disarmament would look like. As we heard, having an international witness and an independent non-governmental committee was a way of the government and the opposition group, the militant group, the IRA, to create trust. And I don't think that we have any kind of independent non-governmental committee. The Board of Peace, I wouldn't call it that. It's not. It's a project of the UN. It couldn't exist without the billions of dollars that nation states are putting into it. So there are some comparisons between the IRA and Hamas and the process of disarmament, but the situations are also very different. So I do want to acknowledge that. But I do think that having some sort of independent, non-governmental committee would be helpful for the management of this disarmament, because in the peace agreement or the 20-point peace plan, there is a part where it says Hamas must completely surrender its strategic weapons and arms, completely dismantle Gaza's underground tunnel network, share maps of its entire subterranean infrastructure with who I don't know. And if Hamas complies, Israel must ease material restrictions and execute a phased military withdrawal. I don't know how they're going to do that because they are in 60% of the Gaza Strip right now. So I just don't see how any of this is going to work out, which is why the announcement last week really surprised me. But it does show a tad bit of desperation, which I hope will lead to some sort of humanitarian relief. Which brings me to the next part of the interview. So let's listen up.
And how has the Board of Peace addressed the continued attacks, Israeli attacks, where more than 1,000 Palestinians have been killed since the ceasefire was declared?
This is clearly one of the blatant blind spots of the Board of Peace. The Palestinian authorities on the ground have recorded hundreds, if not thousands, of violations of the ceasefire terms. We've had over 1,000 Palestinians killed since the truce was supposed to have gone into effect. And not to mention the fact that Israel, which was supposed to withdraw to a demarcation that would control about 53% of the Gaza Strip, has actually pushed that forward to between 65 and 70%. And Prime Minister Netanyahu himself has made it quite clear that he himself has been directing this, but we've also seen that movement precisely on the ground. Very little of this, if any, is actually being called out either by Mr. Mladenov or by the U.S. officials. And what they're actually doing is allowing Israel to keep bending the terms of the ceasefire, if not openly violating it, and such that they're recarving the Gaza Strip in such a way as to entrench their presence rather than to withdraw. And so the ceasefire terms itself, while it has certainly lessened the pace of the violence that we saw last year, the current conditions have now put about 2 million Palestinians in a humanitarian purgatory where their fate and their lives, their access to food and to clean water and other basic needs are being held hostage at the moment to the question around disarmament and around guns in the Gaza Strip. And major pressure needs to be pushed onto Israel and to the United States in order to flip those kind of priorities.
Humanitarian purgatory. That is fucking insane. What a crazy fucking phrase. It's really heartbreaking. The fact that whether or not people get food depends on whether an armed group that says that they're there to protect those people lays down their arms against a military that is actively occupying them. Anyways, my name is Art Delinsky, and I've been talking with you about some news that came out last week from Gaza, where Hamas announced that it will discontinue and dissolve all its political operations within the Gaza Strip, making way for the newly appointed Technocratic committee to come in, take care of the day-to-day operations. Not sure when they're going to do that, but it is what it is. If you'd like to contact me, I'm available on Instagram at Art Deli Sideshow. News, views, comments, concerns, all that jazz. I'll be back next week. Take care of yourself and each other. Like it or not, we are all that we've got. Okay, love you. Bye.